Okay, let's get going. Welcome to the 130th episode of the OSPA's Thought Leadership Series. As you can see, despite our close physical similarities, I am not Martin Gill. I am Michael Gibbs, and I'm honored to be sitting in for the redoubtable Dr. Gill. Just a quick background on me. I've been in security for 27 years, first as an editor of Security Management Magazine, then developing ASIS's CSO Roundtable, then as Chief Global Knowledge Officer at ASIS in charge of the magazine, education, certification, standards and guidelines, and a few other areas. I now have my own consulting practice called Global Insights in Professional Security, in which I contribute security research on such topics as convergence, business continuity, and blockchain. But enough about me. Today's topic is timely, controversial, and expensive issue of ransomware. There may be no more important or relevant security topic today. And we have three tremendously experienced and talented panelists. I will ask each of them to introduce themselves in about 20 seconds. Then we'll go back to them in the same order and let them give an opening statement that will last no more than 3 minutes. Remember, get your questions in early by clicking on the question and answer button on the bottom of your screen. I will try to get to as many of your questions as I can. Okay, let's start the introductions with Luca Tenzi, who's Swiss, but is on vacation in Italy. Luca.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Mike. Yes, it's correct. I'm a Swiss national, about 20 years, maybe 25 now, in security. I'm currently in vacation in a nice area in Italy. And yes, my experience is in the private sector, before that in the military. And then in the recent year, I have a dual hat in a sense. One is I have my own consulting company. And then at the same time, I'm currently working for the United Nations Specialized Agency, a couple of agency, one in Vienna, where I work for the Resilience Project in the last 3 years, and one in Rome with, I'm working on a more physical and logical integration of security measures.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luca. Let's go to the United States, to Stephen Bernard. Steve.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to join all of you distinguished colleagues today. My background, I won't go into it. We'll be here all morning, except to say that I have law enforcement, military, police, private sector experience over many years. I was one of the original CSOs, I think, back in '83. And today, this is my third year of my consulting business. It's global, it's security, and it really is much to do with cybersecurity. That seems to be where the interest is. So I'll share more stories about some of the urgent phone calls I've had from victims of ransomware in panic mode. But that's where I find myself spending a lot more time these days.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. And finally, a bit up north in Canada, we have Terry Cutler. Terry.
How are you? So I'm Terry Cutler, and I'm the founder and ethical hacker here at Strategy Labs. And I'm also an educator where I present over 32,000 students from 160 countries via my internet safety training program. And because I help so many business owners and individuals from my online content, I was also named to IFSEC Global's top 20 most influential people for 2018, 2019, and 2020, as well as the CISO top 100 platform, which I find interesting because I can't influence my kids to come to the table without an iPad. So thanks for having me. And I hope I look forward to sharing my knowledge on this webinar.
Great. Thanks, Terry. Now, each of you will have 3 minutes in that same order to give your opening statement on ransomware. I'll try to keep you to that limit, but looking forward to some of your insights. And after that, we'll get to audience questions. Please get your questions in early, and I will endeavor to get to all of them. So let's go back to Luca in Italy. Please, 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting. I am not a natural expert on IT, so I come from more the physical and intelligence part of this. And about 20 years, 25 years ago, I collaborate and work on the classical kidnapping for ransom IT activities. And this is a little bit where now 20 years later we are looking at. So my experience and what I look at it from a ransom perspective is really what did it work, what we did right in the past with the, let's call it the classical physical kidnapping, and what is different now that is much more difficult. Probably three thought is that first of all, kidnapping was in the 80s was very usual. So we knew that somebody was taken hostage and taken to another location, and then there was a discussion that was going on, but it was one element. So one person, okay, there was occasion where it was a group of people, but normally it was a limited. So the impact toward the company was different, completely different. De facto is that now with the ransomware is the attack is larger. So it's not just limited to one machine or to a limited machine. And this is where it starts to be much more complex. The other element that it makes me think all the time about it is during the kidnapping period, ransom and kidnapping, we started to do certain things. So we started to have to limit the possibility of paying ransom. For example, in Italy, with Legge 82, we said, okay, because kidnapping is becoming a business, we're going to prohibit families and companies to pay ransom, or we limit, we froze. The same in the US and in other country or in other international companies, we start to see that we could not pay ransom because that would through the fact that we were supporting maybe criminal organization or terrorist act in the US and in Canada, for example. So this is a little bit where we start to see that started to become a little bit of a changing moment for everybody in that sense. And the last and not least is that it seems that we have not started to think about that and how to block the payment. So this is maybe that where ransomware for me is the challenging at this moment in time.
Excellent. So bringing in the physical ransom as for comparison to ransomware. Good insights. Let's turn to Steve and Bernard. 3 minutes.
All right. So I've heard this data referred to as the new oil. If you think many years back about when oil became so important to everything that we did for energy and so on, data is. And I think one of the things that we saw happen in the last 18 months is a lot of companies that were perhaps not digital or at least very well structured digitally had to become digital to survive the pandemic. And so they thought totally differently about how they would sell and market their products. But the fact that they went digital made them more vulnerable. And one of the things I think that we saw happen as well is that they did it in a hurry. They didn't really have the time or take the time to think about what vulnerabilities might have come along with what they did right and what they may not have done right. And so I think it's now a time out is called for a review and an assessment of vulnerabilities, a gap analysis. I think that'll really help. And part of the reason why is that with ransomware, they don't discriminate. They don't care who the victim is. We've seen that, whether it's food and JBS or a Colonial Pipeline or a utility or an energy or healthcare. I mean, the list is a mile long. And I forget who it was that said that when they were asked, why do you rob banks? They said, it's because that's where the money is. Well, why do you do ransomware? It's because it is extremely lucrative. So I've read recently that the top 6 ransomware gangs, individually, these people reside in Russia. And Russia's attitude on this is that it's not illegal there. As long as they're not attacking their government, they don't seem to care. So in a way, it's safe harbor for those individuals. And they've been able to draw tens of millions of dollars from this. The other thing that we're seeing with ransomware is it's now become in the deep and dark web, everything is available. So if you don't know how to hack or penetrate, you can buy that. So you can have ransomware as a service. So as you go along, they'll help you, put your program together. They'll help you negotiate the ransom. They'll help you deal with an insurance carrier that may be where a company is more likely to pay. And so when they're targeting, it used to be just whoever's vulnerable, let's go get them and we'll make a demand and we'll get some money. Now they're looking at, and they're finding ways to determine who's insured because they're more likely to be able to pay more money. So I think that that's what we're seeing. And we'll talk more later, but I think also what we've got to start to look at is that this is a global problem for everyone who's connected. And however, what we're seeing is the majority of ransomware cases, I think, are occurring in the United States. So it's US companies that are being mostly victimized, including US government. So what does that mean? And I think again, fast forward, we've got to do more together. So we'll talk about that as well. But obviously this is a scourge. It's like a pandemic. And it's something that the one thing I'm very concerned about with a lot of the clients I talk to is it's somebody else's problem. No, actually it's not. And if you're willing to take that kind of a risk, then maybe you're not the right person to lead your company. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Steve. A lot of good points there. Ransomware as a service, safe harbor in Russia, US being targeted predominantly. And finally, but certainly not least, Terry, in Canada, your 3 minutes for opening statement.
Sure. And as Stephen mentioned, talking about safe harbor for cyber criminals, our organized criminals. If you look at how they've evolved, back in the day, if they wanted to become a drug dealer, they had to go to another country, find the supplier, test the product, bring it overseas. The product could be lost at sea, could be a subject of sniffer dogs. Then when they bring it to the streets, there could be rival gangs, and there's a lot of risk for these guys. So now they're able to hide behind anonymous proxy systems and pretty much get paid without being traced. Is very, very attractive to these guys. So that's why they've moved everything online. It even comes with 24/7 tech support by other cyber criminal gangs that are well established. And anybody can start up their own little criminal organization. It comes with you can buy a ransomware kit for under $3,000, and it comes with full-on tech support. Here's a list of potential victims, and you're going to share the profit with the affiliates. So when you look at some of these gangs that earn $90 million in like 3 months, we're not getting ahead in the cybersecurity industry. We're far behind.
Well, great points there. Talked about the untraceability and ransomware in a box, like ransomware as a service. So get your questions in. We have a few good ones in already. I'm going to start with one that came in earlier, and I'm going to address this to Terry. This one is from Ewan Grant, and he's a former UK intelligence analyst who covered the ex-Soviet states. He wonders whether some ransomware attacks require retaliation. And he asks, do we need different approaches for different types of ransomware? And what criteria should be used for differentiating responses? And he notes recent attacks on JBS, et cetera, that couldn't be addressed by law enforcement. And now it looks like our evil was retaliated against because their sites have disappeared. So, Terry.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
So there's some great points in there. And what's interesting is that, as ethical hackers, for example, we have tools that allows us to trace back some of these folks, even if they're coming to anonymous proxy systems. We even have the capability of turning on the guy's webcam and taking a picture of the guy and sending it back and says, yep, it's that guy behind the screen when it happened. And the issue is we didn't have a warrant to do that, right? So for us, it's illegal. So we can actually get in trouble for doing this type of retaliation. So that's why we require the help of law enforcement. So if you look at the attacks on Colonial or JBS, there's no way that we can really help without having law enforcement or the military involved to trace back who these folks are, because they have jurisdictional power. They have the warrants. They can work with telecommunications company that can help triangulate these folks better. We don't have that capability. So it's going to be ever required more and more to work with law enforcement eventually. The problem they have right now is that they don't have the proper training or the staff to help you out right now. So if you're a victim of ransomware, you can't just call up your local police department and say, yeah, come help me. They're like, sorry, you're on your own. So they're looking at these cases individually instead of as a global situation, in my opinion.
Good point. And I want to take that question and turn it on to Steve. With a wrinkle, Jeff Sieben asks, and hi, Jeff in Canada, how should a business think about getting assistance with government authorities, like local police versus national security? So can you address that based on what Terry said?
Well, I definitely can talk to that, having come from Sony Pictures Entertainment and the near destructive attack we had with North Korea, which was their intent, by the way, nation state, to destroy a company, embarrass a company, steal their secrets, and do a lot more, actually. And day one, the decision to engage the FBI and ask for their assistance was made. And, we decided to, while we realized that legal privilege was certainly a concern, this was about the survivability of the company. And you know what? It worked out. And here we are years later. There's actually a 190-page affidavit online that was unsealed about a year ago that lays out exactly what happened in depth. It's worth a read. But the point of notifying law enforcement, I think what we had to look at is, knowing it was a nation state early on, the Bureau has 90 plus legal attaches around the world in embassies and consulates. And while they don't have any more legal right criminally than the Bureau, than we did, really, they had influence. They had relationships that were established. And it proved fruitful for us and for the Bureau that they could do that. So, and a funny story is, several months later, I was having lunch with the Culver City Police Chief, LA, and he said to me, "Thank you so much for not calling us on that day, because I don't know where we would have started or what we would have done." But now you have Secret Service, you've got, other branches of government that have far greater capability in helping you. And that's what they want to do. The fear that they're going to come in and see something and, you're going to end up in court. And unless you're a criminal enterprise, I don't think that's a real concern. I think that you're going to see that you do need help and you're going to get the right kind of help. That doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility as well. That's important, to know what your role is, to know what their role is. But we did it, and I think it's one of the reasons we saved the company.
That's great experience, and thank you for sharing that. We're getting a lot of questions on whether security departments are prepared enough to prevent or even handle ransomware. One question I'm going to direct to you, Luca, it's from Mark Beaudry in Boston. He says he's conducted research on ransomware that targets criminal justice records and data, and it's had a huge impact. He asked, do you think that organizations with security departments are prepared enough to prevent ransomware? I mean, it seems like we're all throwing up our hands, and it's a huge problem. It's only growing, and no one really knows what to do. Hence this, this discussion. Luca.
Yeah, thank you. I think the difficulty is always, and me and you, Mike, and many others, we discussed it probably 10 years ago, who is in charge of security? And all of a sudden, when convergence became trendy, let's put it this way, the CIO says, I am in charge because everything is IT. And then the CSO said, yes, but security is very important. So the reality probably is, organization, I will say at large, they are struggling to find to defend themselves against ransomware. The reason is because too many easy targets. And I am working with an organization, and I know that the CISO is in the list of participants that send out an email every 2 days, once a week or every 2 weeks, a test email to see if you fall for a fake email. And he tells me that, regularly there is people that fall for that. So it's that easy to have a point of entry in this larger structure. So that goes back to how easy and how for ransomware to attack us is because there is so many doors. Security, to go back, is it's not prepared for the simple fact that IT people, not all IT people can talk easily with the security people. Some security people are having a stronger approach. They want to lock down everything, but at the same time, and it's been mentioned before, the pandemic has brought a new scenario, which is the scenario of saying, we need to open, we need to work from home, we need to work remotely, we need to work from anywhere. So we are struggling, and I don't think we are ready to defend the fort because the fort has too many doors.
Thanks, Luca. Terry, you're on the cyber side of the house. What do you think of what Luca said? And one of the follow-up questions, and if you want to address this, will cities stand up dedicated cyber fusion centers with both public and private agencies? But I'd like to hear you address Luca from the cyber side.
Yeah, he's absolutely right. A lot of companies they don't even realize all the assets that they have. So a lot of times when we go in there and do an audit, the first question we ask them is, when was your last penetration test, or when was your last cybersecurity audit? And a lot of times they're saying now, we've never had one, or it's been years. And we come in here and do an audit, and next thing you know, we find machines that are still running Windows XP or Windows 7, which are all end of life. But some of these companies, they have no choice to run these softwares because maybe the software that controls the door security system to the building only runs on XP or Windows 7. So they're stuck with this legacy technology, or they have a flat network design, or they got patch management issues, or they're running free antivirus still, or antivirus that can't even handle today's modern threats. Or the biggest one is, oh, I'm too small to get hacked. No one's going to want to hack me. Those are all the ones we deal with on a daily basis. And when we do these audits, it reveals so many basic problems that could have been avoided to avoid a ransomware attack. And the step one is to get an audit done by a third party who's going to have fresh eyes on your environment and give you a non-biased reality check, we'll say.
And continue, while we're on that topic, or maybe Steve, you want to continue, how do you defend against ransomware?
Mike, can I say one thing to
Terry's point? Please.
And interesting enough is that, to Terry's point, we want to do an audit, we want to do a penetration test. And I participate in meetings where people would say, okay, yeah, do the penetration test. And then the expert will say, okay, we will start from the access control, the physical access control from the CCTV system. And they say, oh, no, that is security. You don't need to penetrate from there. You don't need to use those. Interesting enough, we wanted to be digital. We did the convergence on everything, but then we tend to forget that each IP address, a badge reader, a camera, a badge printer is a point of access. If it's not correctly protected, is that the door that will enter? And that is where, to the point what was mentioned, is let's do the audit, but the audit has to be 360 degree and include everything that is connected to the IT system.
That's it. And another point too, when we do the penetration test, one thing we scan for is default passwords. So a lot of people, when they install their switches and stuff like that, they think that they've changed the password to the administrator portal, but they didn't change Telnet or SSH, these other protocols, which still have admin as a default password. So an attacker can get in those ways and take full control of the network. So there's a lot of stuff that they might not know. They don't know what they don't know, right?
So Steve, Sony learned the hard way out, not exact situation, but what else should organizations do to prevent, being victims of ransomware?
I want to pick up just a moment on what Terry said, because I think it's so important. And that is, if you're going to go on a journey, you need to know where you're starting from, right? And so what I found, we actually implemented some ISO standards years ago. And And we were kind of afraid to do that because, oh, I don't know. I don't want to know how bad I am. And so today, what I try to encourage my clients to do is to do the gap analysis. It's okay where you are. It's okay. It's a basis. It's a foundation. It's a place to start. And then what you do is you think about, what are the priorities that have now risen that you should address first, second, third, and fourth over a period of time. It doesn't have to all happen at once. And it doesn't mean you're bad guys, right? But you have to have a continuous improvement cycle where you are constantly getting better because the bad guys are constantly getting better. And if we don't do that, especially as AI comes, we're in deep, deep trouble. So I think it's really important. And it's not to embarrass anyone, right? And it's not that difficult to do. When you think of red teams and hackers, Terry, they're like, oh my God, the guy with the blindfold,
The hoodie.
bag, right? It's not that. It's not. It's just, if you're going to be in the digital world, you better pay attention. So that's my thought. Michael, did I cover that, or is there more to the question?
No, that's great. Now I'm going to turn it back to Terry and say, why isn't backing up your data good enough? I mean, you back it up daily or even more frequently. That's what a lot of companies are doing. Why is what's wrong?
It is very important to back up your data daily. The issue that they're having is that they're backing it up to another system in their network, which is on the same network, and they're not protecting it. So when they get hit with a ransomware, the ransomware is programmed to go after everything, and it's its job to make sure that you pay that bill. So it's going to look for USB keys that are attached to your computer, your network attached storage. It's at the point now where it's actually going to reinitialize the hard drives of it and destroy the data on it. It's even going to go attack your SAN, which may have a copy of your backup. So it encrypts everything. And so some people say, well, I'm going to back it up to the cloud. So they back up like 13 terabytes to the cloud. But if they get hit with ransomware and they try to restore 13 terabytes from the cloud, it's going to take a month to get your data back. So obviously the key is to have multiple copies of your backup and have like what we call them disconnected backups. It makes a copy outside the building and it'll disconnect from the network afterwards. But here's where the cyber criminals got creative. Now they can use double extortion tactics where they're going to be in your system prior to launching the ransomware attack, siphon out your data, hit you with a ransom. And if you're able to recover from your backup, Mr. Customer, that's great. Now, if you don't pay us, we're going to leak your data. And now you're going to get hit with regulatory fines, lawsuits, all a bad reputation, all this stuff bad is going to happen. So pay that bill.
Oh, great points.
Can I pick up on what Terry said? He's so right. The other thing that's changing with ransomware demands is, they penetrate you, they find your data, they exfiltrate your data, then they encrypt it, then they make a demand. The other thing I've seen, and Terry, I'm sure you have as well, or Luca, is that they're actually going to individuals. They did this in our company, where they actually accessed individuals' email addresses, both company and personal, and because they want to influence an outcome, like pay the money, they're saying in the healthcare industry, I've got all your medical records. I'm going to put that on a pastebin site for the world to see just how bad you are. But maybe what you could do is influence this company that holds that data, that is refusing to pay this little bit of money so that this doesn't happen because they don't really care, or whatever the story is, right? So they're actually going after individuals as well and threatening them to influence an outcome. That's how bad it's getting.
That's fascinating. Personal extortion to apply pressure on who's ever controlling the purse strings to pay the ransom. Very sophisticated.
Mike, if I may, and it's interesting what has been just said, because if you are the CISO or at the board level and you have this double situation, one is I've been attacked by a ransomware, I need to decide if I want to pay because they're holding personal data. And on the other side, you have the legislation that says that you have to report the breaching of security and therefore the loss of data right? And if they demonstrate that you didn't defend it correctly, you're gonna pay a bill as well. So you, in one hand, you have, should I pay the ransom, which might come cheaper than actually the fine that the government will send me if the private data are published somewhere. So it's a really interesting situation. In one hand, you have, should I pay, or and therefore I pay quickly and I make it disappear, or should I not pay? But then if they leak the information, I will receive in due time a fine from the government to say that I didn't protect personal data.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, Luca. How do you decide whether to pay or not? I'll hit all the rest of you up too, so don't get too comfortable.
Well, you know, the idea is that before, I would say, and I think the recent case has demonstrated that actually you can trace cryptocurrency. So the idea in the past was follow the money, and then you can catch the kidnappers in the real world, right? But in the meantime, when were dealing with kidnapping in Latin America, where I reside for a period of time, the message was we're not gonna pay, and therefore you were dealing with one individual, limited impact to the enterprise, and therefore you had time to kind of like, I know bargain is not the right term here. It's much more complex. How long can you be out of business because your business is blocked by a ransomware? How long can you be operating under business condition, under less than optimal business condition? The message should be, we are not paying, but we know that we will have an impact. The reality is that people will pay upfront, and then, as we know, there is people that are starting to become expert on doing this negotiation. How's the negotiator were available during kidnapping, physical kidnapping, I would say. I think that here we will see rather soon messages from government to say, you are not authorized to pay, because if not, we already lost control in a certain sense, but we will lose much more control. So I would say is a difficult decision, and is reside on the CEO decision at a certain moment in time.
Okay, thanks, Luca. Steve, your client comes to you and says it's a large corporation. It says, we have 20 terabytes of data uploaded to the cloud. We had a ransomware attack. We need this data. We only backed it up every other day, and we need the more current data. Plus, we don't want any of the information leaking out. They're asking $20 million. What do? Are you calling up a negotiator, a professional negotiator? What are you asking them? What are you advising them?
So this has become a cottage industry, if you will. There are some really good companies out there that provide negotiating services. And what they do is they will take a look at, they can determine how skilled your adversary is, right? Whether they're amateurs or pros. They can also buy you time, because typically a ransomware demand is a very quick turnaround. If you don't by this date, this will happen. And they're doing that to pressure you into paying sooner rather than later, and they don't want to negotiate. Maybe they're not good at negotiating. So, but there are companies that do a good job of that. And if you're gonna pay, they can actually help you save money. I saw something a moment ago too on insurance, right? If the attitude is, I've got insurance, it's not a problem. Sorry, it is a problem. Insurance is not going to give you the full coverage that you need to recover. And today, there's going to be, I think we're going to see a change in the indemnification of companies on cybersecurity, that insurance companies are not going to be so able to just pay a ransom. And the other thing I'm seeing on insurance is that, for example, they're not just writing policy anymore. And by the way, the policy they are writing is up tenfold in cost if they are willing to insure you. And for example, I know a company last week that was denied because they didn't have multi-factor authentication. They didn't have the basics that they should have in place, patch management, right? Things like that, that they should have had. And so they were just denied a policy. And you're going to see a lot more of that. And to the point that Luca mentioned earlier, pay or don't pay. Well, what are the rules, right? The government actually may put a burden on us where like FinCEN and OFAC are saying, if that money ends up in the hands of a bad guy on a list, you know what, you're in trouble. And they're saying that to the insurance company and to the victim. So anyway, I could talk all day on this, but I'll stop.
Those are fantastic points.
Yep.
I'm going to turn the question to Terry, but I have a wrinkle. Sue Williams is asking, have we made inroads in the way we can follow the money post-crime? So we know Colonial Pipeline, the FBI recovered a lot of that money. Now, personally, I don't know how they did that. Have we made inroads? Terry, can we get the money back?
That's gonna be more of a question for Stephen, but from what I know so far is that yes, there's ways to find out what wallet it's going to, and there might not be a way to find out who actually owns that wallet. And I think a lot of these guys are going to get caught in the real world, because if anybody could be a cyber criminal, right? It could be a high school student that works at a gas station who's now earning millions of dollars, but now he's showing up to school in a Lamborghini. That's not normal. That's when the government's going to step in, or the revenue agency, and say, who the heck is this kid? And that's where things can happen. But if I want to touch on a couple of points that Luke and Stephen brought up, to pay or not to pay. Sometimes they don't have a choice, right? Because let's take healthcare, for example. And I worked with a couple of healthcare organizations. Oh my God, it's a mess. And if these guys ever got hit with a ransomware, it's going to be probably way cheaper to pay that bill than it is to bring in a whole incident response team and clean this up and get their systems back up. But folks don't realize that once they get hit with a ransomware, they have to completely wipe their environment and rebuild from scratch in a parallel network. And also with insurance, they're at the point now where if you don't have EDR technology, endpoint detection and response technology, which is Star Trek compared to the antivirus technology most people are using today, they won't even insure you. And to Stephen's point with OFAC, there's these sanctions that say, if a company like ours comes in and does incident response, and we have to negotiate a ransom on behalf of the company who's either going to lose their data or lose their company or pay it, we'll get in trouble for facilitating that payment. And then we're going to get in trouble for it. So how are we supposed to help companies if from bankruptcy or payments,
This is an incredibly nuanced area, and it's quickly evolving. So yeah, thank you for those points.
Mike, just to maybe to clarify one thing, AXA, one of the largest European and worldwide known company, has announced by end of this year to cancel any cyber insurance. The reason is, and it's been mentioned, it's too complex to reinsure. So AXA reinsurance policies are too complex. And we will see that this might be a new trend where insurance company will say it's too difficult for you to protect, and therefore we cannot just assure you, we cannot just insure you for the full amount and therefore we pull out. And in the real world, let's call it like this, in the kidnapping for ransom, at one moment in time, KNR policy were available, and for company and private, a very wealthy private individual, but there were rules that you had to apply. Your home was supposed to be secure. In certain cases, you were required to have close protection details. You had to add special cars. You could not go in certain location, and so on and so forth. This is not possible in the cyber world, and therefore we will see that we will pull out. And maybe one last point. Even though everybody are talking about Bitcoin being used to pay ransom, and de facto is rarely used to be pay ransom. Cyber currency or cryptocurrency are used, but Bitcoin is not used to be too well known. There are other less known, less expensive cryptocurrency that cyber criminal likes more because they are less traceable.
Thanks for that. Bitcoin not used. Hard to get reinsurance if you're a ransomware insurance provider. And the lessons from the physical. I just wanted to acknowledge a question from Hans de Jong, who asked, "What can we learn from negotiations with kidnapping criminals?" But I think you addressed that. Some of the differences. Are there any other points further points, or did you cover that already?
No, I think it's been mentioned as well by others, but I think it's that the negotiation, kidnapping negotiation in the real world had a different tempo that in the cyber world. You know, we know of kidnapping that lasted 2 days, but we know of kidnapping that lasted 7 years, and therefore in the cyber world they will last 1 day to maximum 5 days. You cannot be out of business for so long. So from a negotiation perspective, this is much more difficult, and you know, you cannot just hang up on a hostage call and say, okay, call me back when you have a real deal for me, which maybe you have done in 20 years ago. Now here you need to be on the momentum. And something that has been mentioned, we are dealing with criminals different criminals, but they have not. These criminals are very skillful, but not necessarily very old. So you might have a 16-year-old or a 20-year-old on the other side of the phone call, let's put it this way, that has no clue how to negotiate. He just wants some money for free. And I don't think he goes to the high school with a Lamborghini, but that's the idea.
All right.
Well, Michael, if I can, there's
Quickly,
a real
because we only have 2
distinction
minutes.
that we should draw here. Lucas talked about kidnap as it relates to people and how we managed all of that before. And now we're talking about kidnapping, or if you will, extortion, as it relates to the digital world. The fear I have, and where I think this is going to go, is that it is going to reach a point where it's having a negative effect on people, just like kidnapping in the old days. And we saw it in, I think it was in Germany, a hospital was taken down for ransomware, and someone arrived in an ambulance who had life-threatening condition, and they couldn't treat him. So they drove 20 miles away and the individual died. That's something that I think that's what's going to put this whole issue on fire with government and private sector, where we come together, because we're treading on thin ice. And the other thing that happened in Florida, where the guy tried to contaminate the water treatment plant, that's a bad deal.
That's where it came to human error, right? Yeah. Because the guy wanted to,
I'm going to let you wrap up. Luca and Steve had their chance. So Terry, you can have the last word. Thanks.
So I think the new ransomwares that are coming down is obviously because of human error. It's all about, they have to understand that security is not about convenience. So when you take the example of the water treatment plant, where the administrators were allowing remote access into the computer with, I think it was VNC, I can't remember the application, but it was unmonitored. So the guy was wrapping up his day and noticed his mouse was moving around. And that's how he realized, oh my God, we have a problem here. And he started, the hacker started changing settings for the water. Luckily, the guy was still at the office. That's how I was able to stop it. But what if it was 3 a.m? So.
Well, that's a good note to end on. Thank you all for a very vigorous and enlightening discussion. I know I've learned a lot here. The conversation won't be going away anytime soon. And speaking of that, this webinar is being recorded and a blog post is being written, and both of those will be up on the OSPA site within 24 hours. I'm sorry if I didn't get your question. Feel free to reach out to today's panelists with any further questions. So some reminders. Martin will be back next week when the topic, let me go right to the nominations. The Outstanding Security Performance Awards are closing in Benelux 20th of July and in Germany on 2nd of August. Please get your nominations in if you know any outstanding security professionals. They're also open in Norway, Australia, Romania, and the UK. And the TECA nominations are also open in the UK. Tackling Economic Crime Awards. Please do get your nominations in. Also, the cyber OSPAs are open, and this is global, so not limited by country. And as you can see here, there are many categories from CISO to product and equipment manufacturer. Please nominate anyone you find deserving. Now, I can say that Martin will be back next week on the 22nd of July, talking about celebrating the role of the security officer. And then a week after that, the CISO perspective on critical infrastructure. And then a week after that, what is meant by profit protection. So that brings us to the end of our scheduled time. It's been an honor sitting in for Martin, and we will sign off. Thank you to our panelists today, and thank you to the audience for the fantastic questions. And remember, as Martin says, whatever you do, wherever you're in the world, stay safe.